Hi, I'm Patrick. Tonight on the Real Lombardino's Cooking at Home, we're making ribollita. Now this is a classic Tuscan peasant soup where nothing goes to waste. Lombardino's restaurant has been an institution in Madison, Wisconsin since 1952. I took the restaurant over in 2000, so 20 years ago, this was the very first soup we put on our menu. I took some classes in Tuscany and learned how to make the soup. Now at the restaurant, we do everything from scratch, from soaking the beans and slowly braising them in olive oil. But here at home, we're under quarantine, and we're gonna use whatever we have in our pantry. So we're gonna use some navy beans in place of the cannellini beans. We're gonna add some chickpeas, crush some tomatoes. I like a little bit of smokiness, so we're gonna add some ham. We went out and bought a big ham when we were put under quarantine. Then we have aromatic vegetables. We have carrot, celery, onion, garlic, and a parsnip. We're gonna add some fresh rosemary and sage, and then the peasant style of this soup means that we're gonna use some toasted bread and pour this rich soup right over the bread. I've got my mirepoix cut for my Ribollita soup. Ribollita means reboiled, so this is a soup that keeps really well and it gets better every day as it sits. All the flavors come together. To start our soup, I've got my mirepoix cut and I've got all my mise en place, my things in place. I have some finely diced garlic, then I have some multicolored carrots, parsnips, a little bit of celery, and some onion, all cut to the right size so that they will wilt down and fit great on a soup spoon. This soup, I like to use a little bit of smoky ham or bacon in it. So I'm gonna take a chunk of my ham, I'm gonna dice that up. And this soup also will have some escarole in it. Traditionally, this is a soup of white beans and Tuscan kale. There's a black kale that grows in Tuscany, very hearty, something substantial for the peasants to make it through the winter. So I'm just gonna use some escarole today, which is a bitter green that we use quite a bit in our restaurant. We'll get this ham all diced up. Again, you want everything so that it will fit right on a soup spoon when it cooks down. Then I'll show you how we cut up our herbs. For this soup, I'm using some hardy herbs, kind of winter herbs I think of, rosemary and sage. So the rosemary is real easy to do. It's like these long branches. I just strip the needles from the branch, and they're very kind of coarse, so they really need to be chopped up well. You can save these little branches. We throw them on our fire when we light the grill. So these you really have to kind of just get in there and chop them up. The rosemary is a great complement to the beans and the ham, but we want to break them down quite a bit. Nobody wants a thick needle of rosemary stuck in their teeth. So I'm bringing that all together. Give it one last run through with my knife. Set this aside, and then we'll do our sage. Sage is a little bit softer, and I'm gonna just leave it right on the stem, kind of curl it up, and just cut right through here into little strips. We'll come back and give it a nice rough chop to finish. Discard those woody stems. And the final ingredient for our soup is a little crushed tomato. Set my sage aside. Bring a bowl in here. So I'll show you these whole tomatoes in a little bit of juice. I just take them out and just crush them up with my hands. Whoa! That was a live one. So I roughly chopped my escarole. That's gonna wilt into our soup, and I had to wash it. So I've soaked it for a few moments in some cold water, tap water, and then I'm gonna lift it out with a strainer into another bowl. If I would pour it through a colander, then I'd just be pouring all the dirt and grit and sand right back over my escarole. And this method works for any kind of lettuce in lieu of not having a salad spinner. But this is a great way to clean your lettuce and leave all the dirt behind. To start building our soup, I'm going to add a little bit of extra virgin olive oil to a large Dutch oven, just enough to coat the bottom. I'm going to take my smoked ham, I'm going to add that in. We're gonna bring that up to a high heat and let this sizzle up a little bit. And now this soup is gonna be made with the two different kinds of beans. We have the navy beans, the tomatoes, the escarole, all of our mise en place, everything in its place. And then we have a quick simmering chicken stock in the back here. We'll go over how to make that in another video. We'll link that up on YouTube. So we can just hear our ham starting to sizzle a little bit in here. To the pot, I'm gonna add my onions. My celery. Carrots and parsnips, all kind of roughly chopped. I'm going to give this a stir. And then we're going to give it an initial seasoning with some coarse kosher salt and a little black pepper. We'll season as we go, building layers of flavor. And then we'll always taste it for seasoning at the end. So this is starting to smell delicious with our quick chicken stock going in the back. All these delicious flavors of the onions and the ham sizzling away. I'm going to add just a little bit of garlic, 2 cloves that I minced up. Again, these are all things you can use from your pantry. If you don't have these beans, you could use pinto beans. Any kind of beans will work in this soup. Let that all wilt down for just a minute. So we've wilted our mirepoix down with our garlic and our smoky ham. Now I'm going to add that cleaned escarole. And this seems like quite a bit of escarole. But that will really wilt down, helping to give us that green, delicious flavor that's going to be in the base of this soup. So as that cooks down, still using a high heat here, I'm going to stir it in, and then I'm going to add in the rest of my ingredients. We have the tomatoes going in next, and then our beans. Then I'm going to teach you a little secret for how to make this soup extra creamy, luscious, and delicious without adding any dairy to it. So as our greens start to wilt, we keep stirring and stirring. Then I'm going to add in my tomatoes, crushed up by hand. We're going to add in our can of chickpeas with their juices. We have 2 cans of the navy beans. I'm going to add 1 can with its liquid, stir those in, and then I'll show you a little trick for how we make this soup extra creamy with the second can. It's an extra step, but I think it's worth it because we want a creamy base, but we also want texture in the soup. All those tomatoes and greens will wilt down. We'll start fortifying it with our herbs and a little bit of homemade chicken stock. And then we're going to let it simmer for quite a while we make some olive oil croutons to pour the soup over. So I take my second can of the kidney beans and I'm going to add it into my blender. Ladle a little bit of the warm chicken stock into our beans. And I'll show you how I puree them. So I have my beans and chicken stock in a blender. I'm going to make sure the lid is on tight. I'm going to start on a low setting and just puree them until they're nice and thick and creamy. So now that my white beans have had a quick blitz in the blender, I'm going to add them to my gently simmering soup. It's going to add a lot of creaminess, as you see. We're going to stir that in. You can see the creamy beans that are going to help thicken as we go. Lots of colors in there. We're going to add our herbs, all that fresh sage we chopped, and the fresh rosemary. Then we're going to take some chicken stock that we have simmering here in the back, put in a few ladles of that, maybe one more. Stir that in, stir our herbs in gently. Then we're going to push this soup to the back burner. Put a lid on, just a little bit askew, and let it simmer. My olive oil croutons are going to be using a day-old loaf of bread that's going just a little bit stale. I'm going to cut all the crust off of these, and I'm just going to hand tear them. So it's kind of a rustic look to it. And then this will be delicious when we pour our hot soup over the croutons, and they will soak up all that delicious white bean and ham juice. So I have a cookie sheet here, half sheet pan as we call it in the restaurant. I'm going to just tear these up into little bite-sized pieces. We're going to toss them with some good extra virgin olive oil, a little cracked pepper and salt, pop them in a 400-degree convection oven for about 5 minutes until they're nice and olive oily and crispy. So I've torn up all of my bread. I'm going to save all of the actual crust, and we can blitz that in our blender, and we'll use those for some breadcrumbs. Nothing goes to waste. Try to practice that here in our home as we do in the restaurant. So I've got some olive oil and scatter a little salt and pepper over these. And I'm going to get in there and mix these all up. Make sure they're all really nicely coated. I think I'm going to give it one more drizzle of olive oil, and then we'll go to the oven. You want every one of these to have a little olive oil squirt in your mouth when you crunch down on that bread. So these will go into a convection oven. So our Ribollita soup has been simmering for about an hour. It looks quite wonderful. Everything's kind of wilted down, really nice and tender, a little bit creamy from those pureed beans. And now we're gonna do a final taste. This is really an important step, to do a final taste and a final seasoning. It's really good. I'm gonna finish it with just the last remaining bits of our herbs, our fresh rosemary and sage. It only needs a little pinch of salt. Some of those beans and the canned goods have a little bit of salt in them. Another twist of black pepper. And then something that I like to incorporate into most of my cooking is to add a little brightness with some acid at the end. I have a beautiful red wine vinegar from Tuscany that's been aged in oak barrels. Just a few little drops of that. Stir it in and we'll be ready to serve. So here's our wonderful reboiled Ribollita soup. To finish it, we're going to use some of these olive oil toasted croutons that we made in the oven. Just rustic hand-tossed crouton. I'm going to ladle some of that soup right in over the crouton. Make sure you get a little bit of everything. Some of those chunks of carrot, the beans, the tomato, a little bit of that delicious broth. And then the very last thing we do to finish this is we take some very peppery, strong olive oil and we drizzle that over the top. This oil again comes from Lombardino in Tuscany. We're pretty generous with it. Our friends Deborah and Terry Hart import this directly, and it's really gonna set this soup off. Well, there's Ali begging again for some delicious Ribollita soup. This will feed us all week, and it's even better the second day. Now I'm going to take a little bit of a taste, and then I'm going to head upstairs and watch Tiger King on Netflix. So good.